Chapter 11. This is our fourth try to get it right. Uh, we've spent a lot of time on the first 12 verses, most of it on the first verse. But today we begin reading our text, or maybe we've already read it, verses 13 through 16. Speaking of those he's just mentioned, he's only mentioned a few. He summarizes saying, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire excuse me. But now they desire a better, that is a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Okay, let's see what our author's saying. These people, they all died trusting God in faith. They had confidence and conviction in God. They hadn't seen the promise fulfilled, the promises that were made to them. Abraham, for example, he had a promise of children like the sand of the seashore, the stars of the heaven. He was promised the land of Canaan would one day belong to his posterity. This is something he didn't see during his lifetime. Nevertheless, he could see them by the eye of faith. The word see can be used in two senses. One, there's a literal, you see it literally. And another is the word can mean perceive. You can perceive a thing, you see it as though it were there in front of you. The Hebrews author back in chapter 2, he was talking about our Lord. He said, we see Jesus. We perceive Jesus. We know enough about him that we can see him through the eye of faith. And so it was with these people. The promises that had been made to them, even though they couldn't be seen literally, they could nevertheless see them afar off. They knew they were coming. They were assured that these promises would come to pass. They embraced them, embracing the promises, holding on to the promises. That's what motivated them to continue their walk by faith. And they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. This is something I don't know if a lot of people actually get to that level of faith, where they'll actually believe, sense, that they're only strangers and pilgrims on the earth. One of the hardest things it is for people to do is to turn loose of the things of this world. It's extremely hard because these things are tangible. These things we touch, we see, we possess. They're ours. They're in our possession. This is something we've got now, bird in the hand versus two in the bush, sort of a thing. And it's hard for a lot of people, even Christian people, believing people, to have enough faith where the things of this world no longer become all that taxing. They can see the things afar off so clearly. Their assurance of receiving those things becomes so solid that they embrace the promises, the things to come, and they conclude, they deduce that they're just a stranger and a pilgrim here. They're just passing through. I've used an example before. Very simple, but I think it's adequate. When we're traveling, we go into a motel. And the thing we try to do is get the motel room for the cheapest price possible. I don't know about you all, but I go in and negotiate with them. They say they want $90. I'll try to get them down to 50. We start dickering back and forth. They'll always come down. So you get the price down to where you can live with it. Well, while I'm there at that motel, whatever I have to pay, if I have to pay $75, I don't want to spend $75 and a penny on that room. I don't want to pay an extra penny. It's not mine. And I'm not going to invest any money in it. I'm not going to go out and call the painters to come in and repaint my motel room. I'm not going to have them bring me in a new bathroom set and dyke it up. I'm not going to have them bring me one of these $5,000 beds and put in that room. I'm not going to invest money in the motel room. Why? It's not mine. I'm just using it for a few days. It belongs to somebody else. Well, to the believer, that's the way they see the world. It's not theirs. This belongs to the world. It's theirs. It's what they live for. It's what they want. Let them have it if that's what they want. It's their world. Let them have the world. As for us, we've got something better than that coming. We don't waste our resources on the things of this world because they're not ours. We invest ourselves in a greater treasure, something better. The kingdom of God, for example, that's where our resources are used. The things of this world become not all that important to us anymore. What is important is advancing the kingdom of God on the earth and ultimately reaching heaven. That's what these people did. And that's why they were successful. And that's what he's trying to say. They all died in faith, okay? They hadn't received the promises, but they could see the promises far. They knew they were coming. And they were assured that the promises were theirs. And because of that, they embraced them, and they turned loose of the world. Abraham didn't care if he didn't own anything in Canaan. Didn't bother him. He didn't try to buy a piece of that land. He had no interest in such things. He had a higher calling than that. They confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Peter the Apostle tells us to see ourselves as strangers and pilgrims or sojourners, nomads who are just passing through more or less, like going to Florida and staying all night in a motel. See yourself in that way. You're never at home as long as you're here. The only time you ever get home is when you're with the Lord. And once you get that frame of mind, that's when you can turn loose of the world. But that's the hard part, you see. That's the hard part. It's not all that easy to do. And perhaps maybe some people never do actually accomplish that. And it's unfortunate. Yeah, Bert?
I think it's easier when you get up to the 70s and 80s years old.
Yeah.
Because when you're young, man, you don't live forever.
What Burton said is exactly what I've experienced in my life. And I think there's two reasons for that. Number one, I've lived long enough to realize that the things I used to think were so important, big deal. You know, the things a lot of young people worry about today, just like I worried about, I don't care about that stuff anymore. You know, when we were building a family, we took care of our house, and we did this, and we tried not to break this, and we tried not to let the kids mess up that. My grandkids come in now, and I don't care what they do, really. I don't care. It just doesn't matter to me. We don't let them go hog wild because they got to go back home and their mom and daddy kill them. But they do get away with more than my kids ever got away with, and they get more too than my kids ever got. And it's because number one is my perception of the things of this world. I've lived and realized that it's not important. Number two, I've got more faith in God than I had when I was 35 or 40. I know that because I've lived it. And my faith today is by far greater than it was when I was 35 or 40 years old, which is what the Bible teaches. Faith is something we learn, okay? We learn it. It stands to reason the longer you live, the more faith you should have. All people don't really grow in faith because they don't pursue it. But for those who do pursue faith, they're going to have greater faith at age 70 than they have at age 35. Time and opportunity has made that possible. And therefore, your perception of the world is completely different. It gets a whole lot easier to see yourself as a stranger and a pilgrim. It's very hard to do. But as long as you keep fighting the good fight of faith, it's going to happen to you. You're going to change. You're going to be transformed And one day you're going to understand exactly what I'm talking about. It just don't really matter. If you live, you die. The only thing I hate about dying is I hate to leave BR my kids and grandkids. That's all. I don't really mind dying. As a matter of fact, I think it'd be kind of fun. I look forward to, me and Allie was talking the other day about the angels carrying us off to paradise and, flying away. And, you got to admit, that's pretty cool to fly away with the angels. That's got to be something we look forward to. But our view of everything changes with age. We learn a lot that we never understood. But that's nobody. I mean, that's just the way life is. Got to live and learn. I think that's a song, ain't it? Live and learn. If it ain't, it ought to be. For those who say such things, declare plainly that they seek a homeland. They're looking for something better. And that's what we're doing. We're looking for something better. We're looking for heaven, which is better than here. There's nothing in this world that compares to what awaits us in heaven. If we think we've had fun so far, we ain't seen nothing, because the best is yet to come. There's nothing in this world that's going to hold a candle to what awaits us in the world to come. And that's something worth holding on to. And that's the way these folks lived. They lived for another homeland, a better place. Abraham didn't need Canaan. He didn't need to have it. All he needed was what he had, and then he was going to go be with God, and he was satisfied with that. And that's why we remember him as one of the giants of faith in the Bible. Most people, if they were asked who do they think had the greatest faith of all in the Bible, most people would probably think about Abraham, because he offered up Isaac, his son, which causes all of us to stand in awe. But this is the reason he did. It was very simple. He trusted God. And as long as God was in control, everything was going to be okay. If I kill my son Isaac, he thought, no problem. God will bring him back to life. That's what he was expecting. He was wrong, wasn't he? He thought God was just going to bring him back to life after he killed him. He was wrong. But that's how much confidence he had in God. He was going to kill Isaac because he was convinced in his mind that God would just give him back to him. Of course, the Lord stopped him, didn't let him offer up Isaac, but his confidence in God got him through his struggles in the world. Truly, these folks, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. The Israelites, when they left the land of Egypt, you remember? And they were in the wilderness, and they weren't having as much fun as they used to have, what they thought they used to have. Sometimes that woman's got a song, no amount of money could buy from me the memories that I have of then. No amount of money could pay me to go back and live through it again. Her memories were fond, but she didn't want to do it again. Well, the Israelites, their memories were fond. I don't know where they found a fond memory, but apparently they did when they were slaves in the land of Egypt. And they wanted to go back to Egypt. They wanted out of that crummy wilderness. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They were tired of manna bread. They were tired of drinking water, which is probably something they didn't really experience all that much in Egypt. But they wanted to go back. Sometimes a person becomes a Christian. What happens? They want to go back. When Jesus taught the parable of the soils, there were 4 soils, you recall. And one soil had nothing to do with the Lord. 2 soils did, but what happened? They wanted to go back, okay, and they did. Only one soil was successful. 25% in the parable were successful. The other 2 went back. And this is what he's talking about. Sometimes when people call to memory the things of the past, they can go back, and they do go back. These folks were looking forward. They weren't looking backward. They were looking forward. The best was yet to come, and that's what they had their eyes fixed on. And they didn't seize an opportunity to go back because they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. There was nothing to go back to. Remember, the Hebrews that he's writing to, that many of them are wanting to return to Judaism. Remember, this Christian life isn't working out too good for us. We're being persecuted. We're suffering various types of indignities. Nobody's shed blood yet, but they're being called water dogs and things like that, and they don't want to be the scum of the earth. And some of them have gone back to Judaism. Some of them are thinking about going back to Judaism, and therefore this letter was written to stop them. Well, what about the ancients? Well, they had an opportunity to go back, but they wouldn't go back. Why? Because the best was yet to come. And that's what he's encouraging his brothers and sisters. Don't go back. The best is yet to come. Therefore, because they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country, therefore, this is what motivated them. There has to be a motive, right? If we're going to excel in anything, there has to be something that motivates us to do it. There has to be a reason for us to do it. When Chris was a little bitty fella, he was sucking his thumb, wasn't it, Bob? He sucked his thumb. And he wanted a John Deere tractor. That's back when they were made out of steel. It cost a lot of money, too. He wanted a John Deere tractor. And we made him the deal. If you don't suck that thumb anymore, we'll get you that John Deere tractor. We tried everything under the sun to get that boy to quit sucking his thumb, but he would. He'd suck. All the time, he'd suck his thumb. So finally, we offered him this deal, quit sucking your thumb, you get the John Deere tractor, and he quit sucking his thumb. I didn't think he would, but he did. And then I had to go buy that John Deere tractor. But he was motivated to be successful. Our promptings couldn't motivate him, but that little tractor did. These folks were motivated by a desire for a better country. Therefore, this is what they would do. Therefore, because they desired it, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. God isn't ashamed of them. Why? Because they desire a better country. Therefore is why God was pleased with his people. They had their eyes set on that which was to come and not so much on the world in which they lived. That brings us to what I call section 4, for the lack of anything better. By faith Abraham, again, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things that were to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel, and gave instructions concerning his bones. Abraham, when he was put to the test, offered up Isaac. That's one of the events of the Bible that probably gets everybody's attention. The fact that he could do that, no doubt one of the hardest thing a person's ever been asked to do. He had confidence, conviction in God, which is what faith is. And even though he had received promises concerning Isaac, nevertheless he offered up his only begotten son. The promise that God made to him was Isaac's the doorway to a multitude of descendants. Isaac is the link. You're going to have Isaac. This is a child of promise when you're 100 years old. You're going to know that I gave you Isaac, because you're going to get him when you're 100 years old. And Isaac's going to have offspring, and they'll have offspring, and eventually your descendants will be like the sand of the seashore, the stars of the heaven. Isaac is the door to the fulfillment of that promise. God said, offered up Isaac. And Abraham's thinking, what about my posterity? What about the descendants that are to come through Isaac? Well, Abraham wasn't really bothered by all that. God had promised him a posterity. He was convinced he would get that posterity. He was convinced that the posterity would come through Isaac just like the Lord said he would. But now that he wants him to die, he's figured on his own the Lord must be working a plan. Concluding that God was able to raise him up. That's what he concluded in his mind. God would bring him back from the dead. This is the only way he could reconcile what was taking place. He knew the promise had to come to pass because God made it. If he kills Isaac, normally that would kill the promise. God's made other arrangements, so apparently, obviously, God's going to resurrect him from the dead. He was wrong in his conclusion, but this is the way he was thinking. He had so much confidence in God, in the fulfillment of his promises, that he could actually offer up Isaac, and did. That's what gave him the wherewithal to do it. It was his incredible faith, his ability to trust God. Now that's the same thing you and I can have. We can have that kind of faith as well. But like Isaac, we're going to have to work for it. You got to work for faith. It doesn't come like some people say. It doesn't just hit you. It doesn't just happen. If we're going to have faith, you got to work for faith. It's one of the hardest things there is to acquire is faith. And we work for it because faith comes through God's Word. Okay, you got to work. If you ever studied the Bible, you know what work is. Well, that's how we acquire faith. It takes a great deal of work. That's what happened with Abraham, and that's what happens with you and I also. His trust was so great that he would offer up his son, and he was brought back to life in a figurative sense. In Abraham's mind, Isaac was as good as dead. I mean, man, he was ready to shove that knife through that kid. He was going to do it. There was no doubt about that. So there was a sense in which he was raised from the dead, at least in the mind of Abraham. By faith, his confidence, conviction in God, Isaac blessed his sons Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. If it hadn't been for his faith, he wouldn't have bothered to pass it on to his boys. That's the point. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, he blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshipped leaning on the top of his staff. He raised up in the bed, and he prophesied concerning each one of his sons, including the two sons of Joseph. This was because he had confidence in God. He knew God would fulfill his promise. Therefore, he told all his sons what the promises of God were going to be. By faith, Joseph, while he was dying, he told the children of Israel to carry my bones back to Canaan. When you go back to Canaan, you take my bones back with you. One of the ways the Hebrews and then the Jews buried their people was they would bury them on top of the ground, usually in a cave or something. Sometimes they built these vault-like things like we got in our cemeteries. They would bury their folks that way, and then after a year went by, they would take the body, wherever it was entombed, they would take the body out, and they would take all their bones and put it in a small box called an ossuary. And then that box just sits on top of the ground. I was in Jerusalem over there, and I walked through one of them kind of cemeteries. All it was a bunch of boxes sitting on top of the ground on the side of a hill. I mean, you know, that was nice. They were lined up and all that stuff. But inside each one of those boxes were the bones of people who had died in the past. And this is what happened to Joseph. When he died, they entombed him. A year later, they would take his body out. They would clean all of his bones. They would put his bones in an ossuary. And now he's saying, when you go back to Canaan, he knew they were going back to Canaan. They lived in Egypt. That's where their home was. None of these people had ever been to Canaan before. But he knew they were going to go back to Canaan because God promised his grandfather that the land of Canaan would be where they would settle down. So he was so convinced that God would keep his promise, he said, when you all go back to Canaan, you make sure to carry my bones back with you. That was faith that moved him to do that. He had confidence in God. All of these are examples of what faith does. When you believe God, you're going to do something about it. Okay? Faith shows itself. You can't have faith and not see it with the eye. When a person has faith, you're going to see it manifest itself. Such as when Joseph made a statement, or when Jacob prophesied regarding his sons, or when Isaac told Jacob and Esau about the things that are yet to come. They believed, therefore they spoke. That's what faith does. It's action. It's action that takes place in addition to belief. Okay, this is what I call section 5, verses 23 through 31. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's command. Reckon what they'd have done if he'd been an ugly child. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of the Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he looked to the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith Moses kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned in the water. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe in the city of Jericho, when she had received the spies with peace. Okay, go back and take a look at all this. Because of his confidence, conviction in God, or their confidence, conviction in God, when he was born, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months. It was their faith that's under consideration, not Moses. It's their faith. They seen something in Moses that set him apart. He is called a beautiful child. The King James Version says he was exceedingly fair. The meaning of the statement, what they saw, was that there was something special about Moses. He wasn't an ordinary child. There was something about him that made him appear unique. And because of his uniqueness, they assumed, I suppose, that he was given to them by God. Therefore, they were not afraid of the king's command. It was their confidence in God's ability to provide special people for special occasions. He was well-pleasing to God, Moses was. That's involved in the statement in New King James Version. They were not afraid of the king's command. Because of their faith in God and their conviction that there was something about Moses that linked him up with God, they were not afraid of the king's command. If they had to be put to death, then so be it. They trusted God in this whole affair, and they wouldn't take the life of their son, wouldn't put him in the Nile River. Oh, there it is. Okay, now this is about the faith of Moses. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. Moses was prince of Egypt. Some may not be that acquainted with Moses, so let's think about who he was for a moment. Moses was raised as the grandson of the Pharaoh of the land of Egypt. He was found by Pharaoh's daughter, taken in, raised by her as her son. He grew up in the palace. Moses had it made. You know, he's like the rich kid that goes out and buys a Lamborghini. Moses could go out and get the Lamborghini of chariots. He rode around in a chariot. He dressed in the best clothes. He had the best education that was possible. He was groomed to be Pharaoh one day. All the descendants of the Pharaoh, at least the direct descendants, they were all groomed for the throne because it could be that one of these are going to be the next Pharaoh. So Moses was groomed that way. He was highly intellectual. He ate the best foods. He went to the best places. He had the coolest stuff. He had it knocked. But when he turned 40 years old, he became of age. At the age of 40, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He knew about his Hebrew background. He knew he was an adopted child of the princess. And apparently he had been tussling with this thing through the years. He watched his Hebrew brethren struggle as slaves in the land of Egypt while he was living high on the hog. Apparently he had been struggling with this for some time, and now he's gotten to the point where he can't take it anymore. He doesn't want to be an Egyptian. He chose instead to suffer affliction with the people of God. Instead of being one of the us, Moses decided to be one of the them. I'd rather suffer with the Hebrews than to live in the palace with the Pharaoh, which was quite a concession on his part. He chose to suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. One time I was talking somewhere, and I said something about sin being pleasurable, and a person told me that there wasn't no pleasure to sin, and they pointed out there's a verse in the Old Testament that talks about it's a hard way to walk, which it is, but there is pleasure to sin. That's why we want to do it, is because we like it. You know, it may feel good. It may make us feel good. It's something that we enjoy. It's something that we really want to do. There's pleasure to it. That's what the draw is. If there wasn't any pleasure to it, we wouldn't be drawn to it. But it's because there is pleasure that we're drawn to sin. The thing here is it's a passing pleasure. Even for Moses, who lived to be 120 years old, had he lived in the palace for 120 years, it was still only a passing pleasure. When the 120 years is up, you're as dead as a person who lived to be 40. Dead is dead is dead. It doesn't make any difference. It's going to end. But Moses decided that life amongst the Hebrews would be better than life amongst the Egyptians. And he gave up. Possibly he gave up the throne of Egypt, which was a lot to give up. Yeah, he got his training. He got his training from his mama. She was his nursemaid until he was probably 6 or 8 years old, and then he was weaned. But up to the age of 6 or 8, which was the custom at that time, his mama had his ear. I know the Catholic Church says give us a child until they're 6 years old, and they'll be a Catholic till they die. They're firmly convinced that in the first 6 years they can convince a child to such a degree that they'll never repudiate Catholicism. And you know, when you look at the Catholic Church, there's a whole lot of truth to that. In just 6 years, a lot of Catholics, they may not be very good Catholics, but they will not renounce Catholicism. They'll remain Catholic in 6 years. Psychologists also agree with that. In the first 6 years of a child's life, they form about, I think it's like 80% of who they are. in the first 6 years. That would be a good thing for parents to think of with little children or who might have little children. Think about how important those first 6 years are. Sometimes think about teaching children about God when they get older. No, don't do that. Them first 6 years is when you want to get them. That's when you want to teach them. That's when you want to make them who they're going to be. Those first 6 years, don't act like they're not important, that they can't learn, because those little people are like a sponge. They'll soak up everything you say, and they don't forget like we do. Allie and Isabella, we have a lot of conversations about God through the years, and those children never forget anything I say. If I say something that seems a little contradictory of something else I may have said a couple years ago, they'll bring it up to me. Pa, you said thus and so. And then I'll have to explain to them each situation. But those little children are like sponges. When they hear something, they got it. So use those first 6 years. Use it with all your might. Try and instill within them a confidence in God, which they'll have very easily, but also who God is, why we love God, why we trust God. Teach them those kind. Don't just teach them about baptism and that kind of stuff. Teach them about the important things, about relationships with God. That's what you want to major on. The baptism and stuff, that can come later. Instrumental music, that can come later. Wait till they ask you a question one day. But when they're young, don't mess around with that stuff. Help them develop a father-child relationship with God, because that's what's going to stick.